if we had perfect conditions, we could probably scale 10, 20, 30% faster.
Wow, I love that. That's awesome. But it also frustrates me that it isn't there now.
And that's really, if you look at it from a really sort of big picture, if you take the entire sort of CO2 emission, all industries, energy and transportation, if you take those areas, those are roughly 80% of all CO2 emissions. If you electrify all industries, you electrify all transport, and you ensure that the electricity is green, that's roughly 80% of our CO2 emission problem in the world. So I think that's really the key. It's kind of interesting that people still are looking at oil and gas as major sources where people know we will run out of that. The question is, will we leave some in the ground? But it's not that. It's not, there's no choice. We need to do this shift. Are we going to do it now or later?
Welcome back to The Switch, not just another podcast. And as you see, in a new setting. Welcome to Switch, the podcast 3.0, I think this version is. You are going to have a great time today with the new concept, new set of questions, and my friends, a new co-host to me. So without further ado, let me introduce him. He is the CEO of Baseload Capital, and he has tons of questions for our guests and is a little bit tricky to have in the studio. So bear with me while I introduce him to this show. Alexander Helling, come join me.
Thank you, Christina.
I'm super nervous.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, you look nervous.
I am nervous.
Yeah.
I don't know really what I'm doing here, but it's going to be fun.
I think it's going to be very fun.
It's going to be lovely.
I thought that it's going to be a trick test for you now to introduce the buttons. So what are they for?
So we have the bullshit button.
Yeah. And when do we do that? Every time you speak?
Basically every time I speak it's going to be that is the bullshit button.
Okay.
And the other one is the
awesome button.
The awesome button.
And why do we use that?
We use that when we think something is awesome.
Yeah, because this is part of our show that we want to elevate people, initiatives, organizations, companies that actually already are doing something to make us switch to a greener and better and healthier planet. So that is why we're using the awesome button.
Fantastic.
Fantastic. Yeah. We still have our producer Emil in the background, so don't you worry. He's with us. Emil, are you game?
Yeah.
Oh, there you go. Good. And don't worry, it's not going to be me and Alex only. We actually have a guest as well. Are you ready for me to introduce him?
Please.
I'm excited. Because today's guest is the CEO and the co-founder of Svea Solar, and board member also there. He founded Svea Solar in 2013 together with Björn Lind. And today it is one of Europe's fastest growing companies and Sweden's leading solar energy company. He has, of course, a master in industrial engineering and science from Linköping Universitet, but he also has a lot of interesting track record. One of them being that he was actually declined working for Tesla and then started this. Help me introduce, are you ready with an applause?
For sure.
Erik Martinson, welcome to The Switch.
Thank you very much.
You know, that's the first time we ever gave someone an applause in The Switch. We usually just let them join in. How does that feel?
Well, then you set the expectations quite high. So I'm going to try to live up to them at the best ability.
Yeah. No, but we should have. I mean, being one of Europe's fastest growing companies, that are big expectations.
Yeah, we try to make a difference. And I think we can only do very good by growing. Because, I mean, taking away sort of CO2 emissions, which is really what our core is something you can only do on a big scale if you want to make a big impact.
Yeah.
So that's basically why we're trying to scale the company.
And I think that's a really good thing for you to continue doing. But before, and don't you have to keep Keep down.
Okay, sorry. I'll be quiet.
No, you don't have to. No, what I actually wanted to go back to, if I can, is the Tesla story. Tell me about that.
Well, so when I studied 1 year in San Diego, also together with Björn, that later also founded a company with me, I got kind of interested in what we can do about the environment, and we heard about this PayPal guy that started an electric car company. I thought the first car that came out was rather ugly, and I thought that's not going to change the needle, but they will take the technology in Detroit and make cars there, and then it will be electric. And but I actually then went into a store in early 2013, and I did a test drive on a Model S, and I said, this is not the best electric car, this is the world's best car. So I decided this is where I'm going to work, and I now try to convince some people that I should open Tesla in Sweden. Obviously, not having a degree by that time, and not having 10 years of experience in the automotive field, which was required, it was quite hard to get that job. But I persistently tried to get that job for a couple of times before they had any job openings in Sweden at all. And then when they went out with the job, I said, well, now you're here.
Yeah.
So I'm going to try to get that job. But
how many people worked at Tesla at that time?
I don't know in total, but in Sweden, 0.
Yeah. You would be the first.
I mean, but they were claiming that we will open Sweden in a couple of years, and I said Norway has the world's best subsidies for batteries, cars, and you're going to open in Norway, and if you open Norway, you need to have Sweden to get down to Europe, right? So you will open there, and they did.
You even had a strategy for it. Yeah.
I pitched, also sort of the electrification curve for cars. That was sort of 2013, mid 2013, and I said by 2026, all cars will be electric in Sweden. And I mean, Norway now, all cars are being sold are electric. Sweden is a couple of years after. I think that we're going to get close in about 2 years.
So maybe your prediction is going to be right. And then we have to send this part of the episode to Elon Musk and tell him what he actually missed. Maybe we will do that.
He's doing quite fine anyway, isn't he?
They're doing fine, but I think that your company that you started is also doing pretty fine.
Yeah.
Definitely. Actually, we want to get to know you a little bit more. So let's move into the personal questions. Wheel of questions. Are you ready for it?
Go ahead.
Here we go.
Wheel of questions. What would you sing at karaoke night?
I think, at karaoke night, I have had songs being thrown at me, and I think Bohemian Rhapsody is probably one of the hardest ones.
Yes.
Wow.
So I would not recommend it.
No.
But I've tried.
And you succeed?
Well, I mean, it depends. I mean, in karaoke, it's all about passion, right?
Exactly.
So I was very passionate.
Yes.
Have you ever sung Bohemian Rhapsody at karaoke?
No, I have my karaoke song, and that's Tequila. Because I'm horrible at singing, but I'm quite good at dancing. So Tequila is only one word. So, and I lived in China for 10 years, so I spent quite a lot of time in karaoke. So I found what is the best trick to do a good performance. And
but I think that's the passion part.
That's
that you're
the passion
doing very
part.
well.
Yes.
Can you what tequila? I don't remember which one is. Aha. But did you do the ta-ra-ta-ra-ra-ra?
That comes in the karaoke, then you dance.
Aha, okay, so you just danced and said tequila.
Exactly.
And you called that karaoke. Okay.
But I heard you hitting the pitch quite well.
Yeah.
But Erik, this vote will be on you.
Yes, for sure.
Okay.
Definitely. Let's see if we have one more from the Wheel of Questions.
Wheel of questions. What is your proudest accomplishment?
I think that if you go back to the company then, we have attracted really good talent. I think we have been able to, over time, really ensure that we get really good people in the company, because the way I look at things is if we can attract, sort of keep and develop the talents within the company, that's over time how we build a great company. So that's I'm very proud of.
You should be, definitely. And with that said, I mean, your company has had a very impressive growth. So has the industry. If you go back to where you started and where you are today, what are the biggest lessons from your side?
I mean, to kind of get the scale, I mean, we are installing about the same amount of solar every month that was installed totally in Sweden when we started late 2013, December.
Is it every month the same as when you started a year?
Yeah, the total industry,
industry.
for the entire, 4 some billion years that Earth's been around. So it's quite a difference in terms of scale. So the business is growing, but we are growing significantly with the business. So I think, scaling the company is like, if you look at also sort of the potential of solar, I mean, we are soon to reach a 2% in the Swedish electricity mix that will be solar. I mean, last year was just over 1%. So it's growing quite fast. And our job is to ensure that we get that number up over time. And the potential in the world, I mean, we're looking at, in many countries and over sort of the very populated areas where solar will dominate, it will be maybe 70-75% of all the energy will come from solar. So it's a fantastic energy source that will be probably the most important factor of reducing CO2 emissions in the entire world.
So if it is this amazing, which I agree that it is, what are the biggest obstacles? Why aren't we at 75 and why are we still at 2?
I think Sweden will... Maybe I should be more passionate.
Please have this stay in the no.
So if you look at the sort of the obstacles, and I think there's a couple of things. Some are actual obstacles, and some is just perception, because there's very hard to sort of predict or understand the sort of exponential curve. Because some things take time, but over time it will still be massive, right? So one thing is to obviously ensure that we make that shift faster, and the other part is actually that the shift is happening. So there's a perception of it goes slow, but it goes actually quite fast.
Yeah.
The other part is how can we make it faster? And I think a couple of obstacles we have is that there's a lot of policies, and there's a lot of permits. When we are, for example, building solar parks, which we do quite a lot in Sweden and all over Europe, there's a lot of permitting processes. So we could have built a lot more on large solar parks if we just had the permitting faster. So sometimes the permitting process can be several years, but the construction might be half a year.
Yeah.
How much do you think it has stopped you? How much more could you have built if the process was aimed?
That's a great question. I think it's also a question of how fast we as a company can scale. But I think, if we had perfect conditions, we could probably scale 10, 20, 30% faster.
Wow, I love that. That's awesome. But it also frustrates me that it isn't there now. How come?
No, I think, it is being better. I mean, there's a lot of, commitments from many governments. I mean, I think that when we started out, almost 10 years ago, sort of people were aware of climate change. There were some talks about it, but now I think it's more than just talk. People are actually trying to make this happen, which will be seen in policy and are already being seen in policies. There's some subsidy programs sort of there. There are also sort of guidelines on what to do. And I think it goes back to really understanding the fundamentals of sort of renewable energy and how to get away with CO2 emissions and creating a circular economy. And that's really, if you look at it from a really sort of big picture, if you take the entire sort of CO2 emission, all industries, energy and transportation, if you take those areas, those are roughly 80% of all the CO2 emissions. If you electrify all industries, you electrify all transport, and you ensure that the electricity is green, that's roughly 80% of our CO2 emission problem in the world. So I think that's really the key. And when you start to realize that, you start to understand the importance of really going into these three sectors, as obviously is integrated in all of society, and pushing really, wind, solar, geothermal for electricity production, and then also some hydropower, and then working with just electrifying the rest. So I think that's really the core. And I think that's being more and more clear right now.
But I think it's quite interesting with the policy, and we see that a lot in geothermal as well. But then the other factor that is quite slow is the grid capacity and how you can build out the grid and how you can adapt the grid for a new, renewable with the combination of solar and wind and what have you, right? So when you build your parks and when you install it on houses, how is that the big obstacle for you as well to grow or scale the company, or that's in certain markets or certain regions?
it's still, I mean, not the biggest obstacle. It will be one of the largest obstacles over time. So that's why we also have built a platform where we are sort of working with batteries. We're working with smart EV charging at the correct times, load shifting and so on. We'll also be able to sort of work with how we heat and cool our homes at the right period of time. So really trying to ensure that, at the peak hours of the grid, we need to ensure that we are then taking away loads from the grid and being able to feed out during those specific hours. So it's really about using in Sweden, for example, we have 2 million houses. In Europe, there's a couple of 100 million houses. Instead of looking at them as liabilities, we will start looking at them as assets where we can feed out energy when the grid is constrained rather than the other way around. So I think that's super important. And that's one of the topics. If you look at Svea Solar, sorry.
So if you take that example, what is stopping us to do that right now? What would you say? Is that the policies or is there something else?
It's a combination. I mean, it's also about, getting the financial structures. I mean, we need to have incentives to be able to do that. If we have limited upsides today to be able to do those load shiftings. It's coming there and the market is developing, but it's also aligning the finances with creating value to the grid. So if you have historically, you had one guy coming out and looking at your meter, maybe once a year. It was obviously not digital.
No.
And then no one really optimized on what hours you're using your electricity because you basically paid for that entire use for the entire year. Now we're getting down to hourly payments and you measure every hour. And this will be changed obviously to maybe half an hour, quarter over time. So you can really, have financial upside on using more energy at nighttime or maybe at peak solar time and when it's very windy outside. That's really the core, and we are trying to build that platform. So going back to what's stopping us, we are really trying to build that as fast as we can to be able to not hit the glass roof in terms of what the capacity of renewables is out there.
So going back to if we would need to disrupt, if you had a magic wand and you had 3 wishes, it's like, I would like to, in order for us to be able to do what we want to do, what would you say?
I think really, understanding the issue and really going into that. We talked about those areas before, but I mean, putting a tax on carbon would be a great way. I mean, you really put a price on doing bad things. I mean, take an example. I think in the 1200s here in Stockholm, you throw out your trash during the on the street, and it kind of affected everyone. And if everyone is throwing their trash on the street, if you pick up your own trash, it doesn't really make a difference, right? But if you go and say, look, we're going to make sure no one puts the trash out, and we're going to take a little bit of payment for having some cars clean up those trash bins that we have, and you pay for that, then it would be a lot cleaner. I think that will be pretty much the same thing that would happen with the CO2 emissions. And it's going to be relatively like a no-brainer decision, like, oh, why didn't we pay for that before? So I think just putting a price on doing bad things. I mean, you can have extra tax on many things, and it's not about adding taxes. You can take away taxes elsewhere and add it on things that are bad.
So that was wish
that would be number one, yeah.
And number 2?
That would be number 2 and 3 too. That's the most efficient way of really pinpointing, what could you as a sort of a leader or a politician do. But then when it comes to sort of technologies, obviously you can have a lot of issues. But if you look from, like, let's say an outside the industry perspective, this goes for all renewables. This is not solar in general. This is not batteries. This is just pinpointing the problem and really ensuring, taxes have a very good way of taking away things. If you tax something really hard, if you tax people that work really hard, they will work less. If you tax people that are doing bad, they will do less of that. So it's a very efficient way of telling people what not to do. So maybe a little bit lower taxes for people that work and maybe higher taxes for people that pollute. That would be maybe creating and put those people to work at green jobs. That would be very good.
We get the incentive system in the right way for the planet.
Yes.
Another thing that I've been thinking very much about is the collaborations between the different renewables. You're sitting here representing solar, you're sitting here representing geothermal, there are other ones as well. Where are we if we look at like the collaboration between the different renewables? Do you think that there should be, or and is there enough today?
I think you raise a very good point there in terms of using the grid capacity combined. I think that's a great way. You can have potentially geothermal, you could have wind power and solar at similar grid connections. I think that's a very good way of doing it. But it's just like trying to utilize that and combining that with a battery also. So you can really ensure, or then even put on hydro storage or whatever you want to do, or at least have hydro for steel production or what you might want to have it for. But I think that's really the core to really look at that. How can we utilize, one of the constraints is the grid, and ensure that we're working with the different sources. The good thing is that if you have solar and wind, those are very highly negatively correlated. So that means when it's really windy outside, it's usually not so sunny. Yeah. When it's very sunny and you have a pitch blue sky, it's usually not so windy. So that means that you actually have a more stable system. If you have about 3/10 of a system that are solar and 7/10 of a system that's wind in Sweden, that would be a good balance to actually get a more solid balance. Today we have a lot of wind power, a little bit less solar in Sweden, so we actually need to catch up. In other areas, in other markets, you should have a lot of more solar and less wind. So there's different calibrations for different markets. But in general, solar will be the number one factor. Ironically, in Sweden, we might only have, let's say, 25% of the grid being solar. So we would be one of the world's lowest sort of solar penetrated markets, but we'd still have about a quarter that would run from solar. So that's quite high still.
But you see hybrid projects like that already now with wind and solar?
Yes, they're coming up with those kind of products, and I think that, but it will increase over time. Yeah. And it also goes back to the constraints. The grid have historically not really been the constraint, but when that becomes a stronger and stronger constraint, because it will be, this type of collaboration needs to be developed, and it will be developed.
If I go back to what you just said with 25%, why can we only have 25% in Sweden then?
I mean, theoretically, we could have much more. But if you look from a financial standpoint, I mean, wind here is quite cheap to produce. We have a lot of wind, and we also have a lot of hydropower, which is an asset that very few countries have. And hydropower is very powerful, and you can also use that to stabilize. So I think that, saying 25% only is not the theoretical sort of upper limit. It's just that that's a reasonable target given our composition. Whereas if you go to Spain, it might be 80%. Yeah. So there's different markets, but I mean, when I say only 25%, most people would. If I said that number 10 years ago, people think I was completely insane. Now people are just saying that's maybe a too high a number. Yeah. But if you look at the trend, Germany is already over 10%. They have a very similar setup like we have. So the potential for solar is huge. I would be more than happy if we beat 25%. But it's also understanding that dynamics that we are living in one of the most sort of darkest corner of the world, you could argue, and we will still have 25% solar most likely. So even in that market, solar is super strong. That means in markets where you're close to the equator, where you basically have air condition over time, it's going to be one of the larger consumers of electricity. You have a perfect correlation between when the sun is out, when it's warm, and when you're going to use electricity. So then obviously those markets are perfect for solar.
Where do you see the biggest build-out? Is it on solar parks, or is it residential, or how will the percentages look like? Is it
I think that's a great question. I think overall, there's some sides where people say, well, it's cheaper to produce the kilowatt hour on a big field. That makes sense. But if you think about it from the other way around, if the grid is one of your constraints, I think over time, basically all households will have solar on it. But that's not going to be enough.
And also follow up on that one, why don't everyone have that?
Oh, that will happen. But I mean, if you look at it, just go in the future, because if you can sort of put it at the very end point of the grid, that means you can sort of take down the grid investments. And if the grid investments is higher than the difference between the cost of producing at a rooftop than at a field, then you will for sure build on every villa. And that's what's happening. Yeah. So that's why those markets will coexist. If solar-owned households would contribute to the entire need of solar for that country, there would be very few solar parks built over time.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But that's going to be needed too.
Yeah.
Because if you take all the rooftops, it won't cut it.
Yeah.
If you look back at the technology development from other renewables and perspectives looking into it, what would you see were the biggest breakthroughs? And I know what breakthroughs there were. What made them come true?
I mean, if you look at sort of different I would say, inventions or whatever, if it's electric cars or solar or other clean tech scenarios, I mean, there's never been really like a massive breakthrough. I mean, you could argue that there was a massive breakthrough about 6 years ago when they started to develop the first solar cells, but it's about the same technology that we have incremental performance improvements over time. So you have a couple of percentage performance every year. That means over time it's a little bit more competitive. Coal, gas, even nuclear is going up in cost per year, but with inflation and also due to other reasons. Whereas solar is slightly becoming cheaper. It's not that, it was much cheaper that year than the other year. It's like a sinus curve. It goes a little bit up and down depending on the market, but it's slightly going down over time. So if you look at today, the price is not dropping significantly. But if you look at a 10-year time or a 20-year time, it becomes a little bit more competitive all the time. Same for batteries. That's why an EV that were not competitive 10, 15 years ago is getting more and more competitive every year. So you can have this prognosis saying that if I look at solar now, yes, it will be a little bit cheaper next year, a little bit cheaper, but not so cheap so it's worth for you as a customer to wait. But it's cheaper enough for you to make a big difference in the upcoming 10, 15, 20 years. So that's why we can do quite good prognosis that we have this incremental change over time. Solar really will be the dominant factor because that's been really the same sort of developing curve for the last almost 60 years. You can say that with a little bit faster in the beginning, but that's really where we are.
That's a really good example. Would you say that is also building trust to the public, creating better awareness about what solar is?
I think, going back to trust, solar and wind, I think it was last year, was basically the same amount of investments in total renewables last year as in it was for oil production. So, it is no longer a niche player. There's massive investment coming in this area. The perception is getting stronger and stronger among the public. And now when sort of scientists and also people that are doing prognosis for the future, everyone is looking at solar and wind and geothermal, hydro as the sort of core power sources over time. It's kind of interesting that people still are looking at oil and gas as major sources where people know we will run out of that. The question is, will we leave some in the ground? But it's not that. It's not, there's no choice. We need to do this shift. Are we going to do it now or later? That's the question. And for some reason, some people think to a debate about should we do the switch or not. It's just like, it's like you have a bank account that are every day someone take a deposit from it, and you said, no, are we going to stop taking the deposits and try to invest the money instead? Well, I think I can do deposits a little bit slower and I can keep doing that for a little bit longer, but you're going to be broke. So the question is, do we want to...
Love that.
Do you want to have some money left in the bank account that we can invest for the future? Or are we going to let someone steal all the money?
If you look at your industry and what you have done as a company, there are companies listening to this from different industries. What would you say are your advice in order for them to move forward, to scale, and to take the next step in their industry?
It's obviously different for different companies, but I think one mindset that you might have as a board member or as a CEO or at least as a management team or even within a company would be, look, if you are not sustainable as a company, you're going to have extremely hard to defend your business model over time. You might be able to rake some short-term profits, and just look at the major energy companies, even the sort of hardcore fossil fuel companies. Many of them are now investing heavily into renewables, which I obviously welcome. So it's not about saying that those companies are going to go bankrupt or die. It's about just ensuring that you have your mind on really understanding the future. So I think going back to that is really not looking at is this something that's going to happen or not. Just looking at how can I make my products 100% sustainable, because that's the only way for those products to survive. And if the answer is I cannot make the product sustainable, then you probably need to look at other products.
But okay, let's have an uncomfortable conversation here, because the truth of the fact is that, for example, COP28 is going to be held by and in the oil industry's hands, more or less. So they still have a hand in it. They're lobbying for a continuance. Do renewables have a chance?
I think the good thing is that currently renewables are cheaper than fossil fuels, especially if you take away the subsidies. I talked about the carbon tax earlier. I probably should have specified first take away the subsidies for fossil fuels and then add a tax. I mean, maybe that was
so we had a second
obvious.
one there.
Yeah. But maybe that was obvious. But I'm going to take that. So on a competitive price level, solar, wind, and other sources are beating coal, oil, and gas, basically. And I think that's great because it would be a lot tougher to say to people, hey, you want to pay more, but get a better or a cleaner product that have the same sort of usage for that person. But if we can offer, which we are offering today, a product that is clean and cheaper, that will move the needle. And I think that, all of these sort of meetings with COP, 28 and all of that, those are great meetings. But what's really matters is that companies, governments really are understanding the long-term plan and understanding we need to have a sustainable future and investing in that. And those meetings, we know the oil lobby is going to try their best to do what they can do. But as I mentioned before, renewables are beating fossil fuels right now. It's just a matter of how fast.
So why are we not moving faster? Is it that the people who are deciding and making decisions don't understand what they need to do? We talked about the grid. We talked about understanding investments and stuff like that. What are your perspectives? I would like to hear from both of you. Why are we not moving faster if we have these options?
I think that the whole industry is actually moving quite fast. We need to move faster, of course, and we need a lot more entrepreneurs. We need a lot more technologies. We need a lot more money coming into the sector. But I think, and to your point, the oil and gas sector is also starting to realize this, and this is a big reason why they are investing heavily into renewable technologies, into product developers, into different companies, because they see that this shift will happen. Then they can do their best to try to slow it down, but it will happen. And by showing off cases like Svea Solar, for example, the amazing trip that you've done the last 10 years, there's also a big opportunity to do and build good businesses in this, which will spur that drive and innovation even further and faster.
Okay, so I'm going to go bullshit on you, and then I'm going to say, okay, so tell me again. So what is then, you said there are a lot of opportunities, and I agree with you, but what is the actual thing that is stopping us then?
Money.
Thank you.
I think, I'd say regulation is part of it that we talked about before. And let's say, if you're waiting for a permit for a solar park that take maybe 3 years, on an argument that we have in Sweden today, we have sometimes they're benching, agricultural land against solar use. It's a great debate. We should have it, but we can now build agriculture use in terms of having animals at the same place where we put the solar panels, but we still don't get the permitting done, right? So if the urgency and from sort of the permitting processes are not sort of reflecting, in my mind, the urgency of the problem. I think, just getting the awareness that, not about saying that everything should go through, but it would, because there's a lot of things that should not be built and it shouldn't be on those places and so on. But the decision making needs to go a lot faster. And when that happens, it will create a lot of momentum that will gain traction. And this is not the problem only for Sweden. This is the same for permitting solar parks in any country, but also having permits for even residential areas. Sometimes Sweden is quite good, but some other European markets are not. So really understanding the sense of urgency, and then there's different areas, but I think really being clear on expectations from governments, setting really bold targets will help drive this change. But I would say that we are running quite fast. And I think going back to this, what's the obstacles? Why are we not going faster? And I think one part of this is that very few people are being able to think exponentially, like I mentioned before, and it's also hard to see that we are actually in the midst of a dramatic change right now. So that's the encouraging part, that we are going to see a big change. The question is, will we do this transition in 20 years rather than 25, 30, 35 years? That would be the question.
Yeah, I agree.
Interesting, and I'd like to end it on a positive note here. So with that said, let's move into questions from the future.
Questions from our future.
What do you want me to do different than your generation?
I would really try to look at how can you contribute value to the world instead of destroying it. I think that's very easy. And by doing that is to understand what is sort of a positive thing for the world contribution. And the reason why I think this new generation have that ability to be able to do that is that we have clear understanding on what's good and not for the world. We didn't have that 30, 40 years ago. So I hope that the new generation will be able to absorb those findings and really be able to do a difference.
So what you mean is that Freya or Rory or other kids, what we want them to do is to understand what brings value to?
Yeah, I think I would just look at it in a very simple way. I think we have the fortunate, especially in the more developed world, is that we have a lot of material goods. And that was not the case, let's say, 100 years ago. So we have built a fantastic sort of living standard. And now we can afford, many of us in this part of the world, to really ask ourselves, what do we want to contribute to the world rather than what do I need to feed my family? And that creates an opportunity to really look into how can I answer those questions rather than focusing on where do I sort of make my ends meet. So I think that opportunity is there for Freya and others.
Yeah.
Interesting. Let's ask ourselves the question. What do you think you at this time right now are actually contributing to? What are you giving back? What's your value to the world today? What do you say?
No, but first I just need to comment. I think you're spot on. Like when we were growing up, or when I was growing up, you didn't think about it. You always thought about, how can I consume more and how can I do this? While my kids that are 4 and 6, when I turn on the tap, they tell me, "Dad, don't waste water." So you already see it right now that they are much more aware than I was when I was 6 years old. That's for sure. So I think that's positive, and I hope that can by working with what we're doing, inspire people to come into this industry, and also the kids. And I think the children book that you wrote is a fantastic example on how we can involve kids at an early stage and understand what is sustainable and how do you make it fun and how do you make it a part of an everyday work.
So now you're taking credit for the book Our Hidden Powers and saying that that's your value back to the world.
Yes.
Okay, good. I'll give you that one. You said yes to that idea, so it's okay. You can do that. What about you, Erik?
I think the way we set up Svea Solar is to try to take away as much CO2 emissions as possible. So if we do that well, I think just to get sort of a scale, if we keep scaling the company over time, I think we have the possibilities to take away equivalent of the entire Sweden consumption of CO2 emissions per year. And I think that's exciting. So that would be my focus for the upcoming years.
And then, as we said, then we will call Elon Musk and say, hey, check this out, what you missed. You mentioned your team earlier today and the people that you are working with, but you're also going to be given a chance now to give sunshine to any organization, individual, or anyone that you want the world to know more about. If you had the opportunity now, who would you give sunshine to?
Well, first of all, there's tons of really talented people now working in this area. So I think that by itself is exciting. But I think, if you look at sort of awareness, I think that Greta Thunberg obviously is a great inspiration to a lot of young people. You talk about that. I think that's exciting. And I hope that movement can also be turned into, that's my hope, also to actual actions rather than also only sort of attacking what's bad, also trying to take that passion that's clearly there to really try to build new things. and try to implement what's already out there. That's my pure hope. But I think it's still inspiring to see the movement she created. And now it's maybe someone else's job, let's see, to take that passion into action in terms of actually creating positive things in terms of taking rid of CO2 emissions, creating a more circular economy, doing all of that Freya and all the other children out there can possibly do.
I think that's a good sunshine to give away Greta Thunberg and all the other Gretas to come out there. I'm going to, of course, end up with the sunshine for you and also for you, Alex, being in the show for the first time. Oof. Did you survive?
Almost.
Erik, what do you say?
I think you did well.
You did well.
I'll improve. I'll still room for improvement.
Yeah, I'm going to give you one last challenge here because you're going to have to summarize our conversation that we just had now after I've thanked Erik after this. So
Fantastic.
the conclusion, and that is up to you. Are you ready for that?
Of course.
Okay. In meantime, Erik, it's really impressive to see how Svea Solar is taking steps forward and is really an inspiration not only for its own industry but also for other industries in renewable, how you are taking command of the market. So thank you for joining us here today.
Well, thank you for letting me be here. Appreciate it.
Should we see what he has as a conclusion? What did you learn here today?
What I really took away, which I didn't realize before, is that the 75%. So then just imagine that number. Like we can replay or we can power 75% of the globe with solar. And you saying that it's already possible right now. What we need is better permitting, of course, then the grid, and then entrepreneurs like yourself to roll it out. And I think that's a good conclusion. That if we go out there, we can lobby, we can support that this actually happens right now.
Did he conclude you correct?
I think that's great. I mean, just understanding the potential, and I think going from sort of a first principle thinking in the way that it's not how much renewables can we have in the grid. I mean, it will be 100% over time, and that's really what we should aim for as fast as possible. Going back to what's the obstacles, what can we do faster? I mean, those are great questions, and we also constantly need to challenge ourselves. Is there things we can do faster for ourselves? Can we be better? Can we ensure that we are providing a better service to our customers? Can we scale our operations faster? All of that, including with our friends in the industry and other industries in geothermal, sort of wind, hydro, what it might be, and also energy storage and other industries coming into the area. I think that's really a key topic. And the good thing is there's going to be a tremendous amount of opportunities in this space because there is quite a few CO2 emissions that need to be eliminated. Yeah. So. But with that being said, I think that I'm quite optimistic in terms of what's possible to do. And our job is to make it fast. Yeah.
You heard him. It's his job to make it fast, but it's your job to make sure to come along on the ride and to jump on fast. Well, Erik, he did his first solar installation on his own, and today you have completely different new technology, so you can get help. So there are no ways to say that you cannot do this. I hope that you enjoyed today's show and that you learned tons, because I did. Until we meet next time, I suggest that you subscribe, and I suggest that you share this episode to someone that you care for, so that you together can take care of switching to a better and greener planet. Until we meet again, take care, and if you can, someone else. See ya.